Welcome obviously to this session for using Easy Platform as a headless content management system. First we'll a little bit discuss also what that means, and then we'll have a hands-on exercise which you can then again keep track of with the standard repository and the virtual box that we have available for all of you. So first of all, a few words maybe about myself. I'm Jani Tarvainen. I work for Easy Systems as a professional services consultant. That's maybe a bit of a mouthful, but what that means is I give trainings on how to use Easy Publish and Easy Platform for customers and clients as well, and our partners. So I help people work with Easy. I also do some project tasks every once in a while, but a lot of it is helping people work with the product, and obviously along the way there's a lot of learning to be done all the time and so on. But anyway, if you have any questions later on or at any point, I think as this is a workshop session, so rather than this talking head thing that I will tell you how things are, we will have interruptions are good and so on. But enough maybe about me and the things, because you didn't probably come here to see me. You came here to learn about maybe something that is relevant to you, maybe not yet, but it will probably be at some point. So first of all, maybe just starting with the kind of idea about the headless CMS setup. So who of you, first of all, are familiar with the concept or think you know what it means? Okay, because that is also one of the things that there's no clear definition of what exactly it is. It is kind of a vague concept as opposed to, let's say, Twig templating engine. You know what Twig templating engine is and so on, and you probably know what Symfony is because it's quite well defined, but a headless CMS can be pretty much anything you want it to be and so on. But in essence, what it means that if you have a headless content management system, the head just means in this case that the presentation layer. So if you have a headless setup, you technically have a content management or content API that provides you content feed of some sort. You can then use that specific content feed for all kind of different requirements to fulfill. For example, there are also some services which provide only a content API and nothing else, and then you have sort of this kind of tools such as Easy. So Easy is still a content management system with a lot of the functionalities that people actually expect from a content management system, even though many of those things aren't actually content management. They are layout management or site management or something like that. So anyway, as you are aware still that the content management system of choice for us in this room, Easy Publish and Easy Platform, both offer an API, a public API that you can use a browser or any HTTP client to use. That it definitely makes it headless. Of course, you can extend any system probably to be headless, but that's there and has been there for quite a number of years. And maybe a lot of times you forget that the headless also means that you need to modify content, so not just view. But for example, some examples that you might use content management or content feed in different kind of environments. One is obviously the kind of classic web client application. Well, not classic, but that you have some kind of a front-end client, probably built with JavaScript, some variation, maybe some your favorite framework. Maybe it's Angular, maybe it's React, maybe it's something completely different. It could even be YUI if you wanted, but it doesn't need to be. But this is one thing that many people kind of think that this is what it is, because, well, that's how people often still think that you have the server and then you have the client, which is the browser, and the kind of things are mixed there. But it can actually also be a web server application that consumes the client or the content, because if you have you can easily, for example, have kind of static site generators which will take the feed that you have and then create, let's say, just static HTML out of the feed. That's just as useful as just as headless as any client application would be, or a browser application. Then in addition, obviously, you have mobile application. For example, you could have some sort of application which you have help text, content, documentation, whatever things which are not in itself related to the application itself. For example, if you have, let's say, some kind of transit application that you use, you might have notices for traffic, or traffic notices that some metro line is down. That is actually content that will probably then be managed using some kind of this tool, whereas the main part of the application is actually something along the lines of routing data or something which you don't want to have in a content management system. Then maybe giving a bit more idea of which kind of settings you could actually already use this today, because you probably have quite a few projects. In some cases, sort of headless approach might be very useful. A few ideas are that if you have a large company, let's say everybody always likes Nike, but say Nike they have probably tens or hundreds of campaign sites running all over the world. Usually there's probably a lot of waste in the sense that the content is entered in multiple different tools, and then some company creates some kind of a standalone website and so on. One thing that obviously the company needs to be committed to could be that you would have a central repository, and instead of saying that create some kind of a website with some kind of management tool, the customer would actually say that we have this content here, and you should use some tool to create a website out of this content. It gives more control, I would say, to the customer in this case, to have control over the content, and then it doesn't still limit the sort of freedom that you might want to have for splashy websites which run for some months or so on. But still probably will be anyway reused again in many cases. So this is the kind of things that would be interesting. Also some boring things like conditions or terms of service is something that will, when they change, they need to be changed everywhere, and then that's a lot of work and so on. Then another idea where you could use a headless tool is that if you have a software product or whatever kind of product, mostly a software product, I guess, where you would have documentation. Documentation would be maybe written in Easy or some other tool, but you need to package that with the product. So if you are, let's say, I don't know, you might have something which is on a ship or on an airplane where you don't necessarily have internet connectivity, but you still need access to the documentation. You might have one step in your product build be that you create a static package of documents and then that standalone version and so on. But this is some ideas. And then obviously the mobile application or any kind of something which isn't a browser could easily use something. But here probably it's more of imagination is your limit. It's easy to think about all the kind of things that you might want to do, but in many cases people are quite happy to try things, and you can clearly give some advantages also. But we'll discuss a little bit more. So maybe a few words still from where we're coming from. So obviously headless content management or these kind of content feeds is not really a new thing. It's been around for quite a long time. I think RSS is the most common one, which people think, and that was still launched in March 1999. So you could have an XML feed with content, and then you could display it somehow. That was already technically one way. But obviously RSS was read-only, whereas now you have APIs which allow you also to modify the data. So instead of you using the easy admin interface to update some pieces of content or news updates, you might use an app for that. So it's also opening that kind of things. And there's just one sort of example which is from 2005. So this is a feed reader which is built in JavaScript a long time ago. It still works and so on. It just maybe wasn't called Headless. It was Ajax RSS reader back then, but the idea itself isn't really maybe the peak hype for headless stuff was a few years back, when I think everybody kind of thought that, at least in conferences you had, that this is the future, only this thing, it's really nice. But the REST API that everybody had to have, and also Easy actually has a good one, or a very comprehensive one. But there's been some changes, sort of, that instead of REST or just random HTTP requests, you go with some standards like RESTful APIs and then JSON instead of XML. But that's sort of kind of to think that you probably have done headless things. You maybe didn't call them that or so on. But then we fast forward maybe to today. So as I told, the hype is maybe over, but it still hasn't taken the use out. So more and more, if anybody attended yesterday the session about the APIs from the Swiss TV, there were really, I mean, interesting aspects to how they use and reuse content across different places, and especially if you are kind of content business, you might want to syndicate your content in a certain way, where Easy's, the internal content model, is actually quite good, because instead of you being limited to HTML formatting, the formatting can actually be something completely different. Many times people are adapted to HTML, because most content management systems are web content management systems, or at least sort of mainstream. So you have that HTML, but in some cases you might want to adapt to, I don't know, the other way around, that you have an existing tool which you want to provide content to. So instead of you adapting that tool to read from Easy REST API, you could maybe even modify the Easy API so the actual other product is able to read using the same format, but the provider is then Easy. And then there's plenty of mature options. So you have all kinds of site generators. So you have at least Jekyll is one, and Metalsmith is another tool which is quite commonly used. And then there's at least Hugo is one, which is another one. And then for front-end tools, if you've been following sort of the JavaScript things for the last maybe 2 or 3 years at least. There's been so much progress that maybe it's been actually good that you haven't learned everything or tried to learn everything, because now it's kind of stabilizing down, at least on many senses, for the JavaScript language, syntax and so on. So it's kind of also cooling down in some sense, but there's still a lot of work going on there. But what is notable, so if you went to some session like this a few years back, you thought that everybody's going to be building the websites with just the feed and some kind of front end. But actually most people are still, at least like the norm is still to use some kind of content management system, and then the tools that you provide using that tool or that product. So Easy Publish used to have its own legacy templating system. Somebody maybe thought that now it's useless to turn to Symfony and Twig because in the future something else will manage that. But so far it hasn't at least happened. So that's just maybe one notable thing, that sometimes you have visions, but the visions don't always fully realize, and so on. Well, for site creation, we'll focus on that. So instead of, or you do understand that you could use the exact same techniques or APIs and things to create a mobile app or this kind of static documentation or something. But from the rest of this presentation and the demo that we'll be working with is sort of focused on creating a website with the headless stuff. So some of the advantages, if I talk about those, when you would choose to build a website instead of using the whole Easy Stack, which you have Symfony whole framework and then so on. So you do actually get a complete freedom to use whatever tools to provide the front end. So if you are very talented in, let's say, I don't know, some specific JavaScript framework or some specific static site generation tool, the advantage is that you don't have to use Easy. So it's especially for some of the, if I talk this larger kind of company that would spread their content using the API, then they really don't even need to think that it's Easy or whatever tool it is, and it also sort of keeps it manageable for the content creators, and they can probably already starting from very early on start creating content in the tool and so on, and there's simply no limitations for whatever you would like to build it with. For example, if you have a content management system which has a lot of in-place editing and all kind of things like that, that comes with the cost, that then you have a sort of predefined selection of libraries and tools which you use to create also websites. But obviously those won't go away, but that is one thing that is refreshing, maybe for some specific cases at least, that you have no limitations. Easy isn't traditionally very limiting in that sense, but some of the more commercial tools, for example, they might have been more closed source tools that you cannot even modify the table layout that it brings out for a menu component or something. Then you had to sort of do a lot of I don't know, CSS hacking to make the navigation not have 3 levels or something like that. Yeah, and then obviously the reuse of content across different properties. So if you do want to merge content streams instead of one stream, because you could also then first merge a lot of different content feeds into one, which you will then consume in different ways. But this is something that can be very complex, and it's not for every case. You probably shouldn't look into this kind of overcomplicated solution for everything. But in many cases, if you're working with sort of media companies which might have tens or hundreds of brands or channels, it might be sensible to create some kind of content feed aggregator thing. But that's something that we're not discussing directly today, but it's sort of an idea that you can actually have quite complex things, and then the end result is really simple to use, but so on. Then what is against then creating a website with, I don't know, if you like React, you might want to, it's great that, I love it, it's awesome. Okay, it might be awesome, but one of the reasons why content management systems tend to be kind of big and general purpose is because people always have the same requests, or many people have the same kind of requests. And with your clean slate React boilerplate thing, just, it's awesome. But then you will start to add the features that the customers want. They will want to do layout management, what Easy Studio does, blocks and content items. You don't have necessarily that kind of information in the content feed, and then the complexity adds up, so you lose that. Another common thing when you create a website, you need to manage the navigation. So, yeah. Things like banner management, these kind of things that then you will end up probably doing a lot of work in addition to the initial, like, whatever Pareto rule or what is like 80% or 20% of the work takes 80% of the time or whatever. It's exactly the same, that you'll get nice really fast, but then like the rest is really, really slow when you re-implement the same things again and again. And also things that you're accustomed to when you're working with Twig or whatever tools, that you get all kind of helpers to render the correct URLs and always be up to date. Whereas if you work with a content feed, the content feed may come from some location, and then because it doesn't even know where it's shown, it cannot render the correct link and things like that. So it is also, there's the danger that you might do a lot of work which is not really that relevant to the actual project, but it's just like cool stuff, but then eats up into things. So exactly, so these kind of things like 404s can be really tricky, and I don't even, as a content management system developer, I don't even remember when I actually thought that, well, is this like when working with a content management system that I will give out a 404. But if you create everything from scratch, you actually need to possibly think about that as well again. And more of the features that people always want is things like feedback forms and other interactive elements, because there is no exact standard for those. So if you want, if you work with a traditional kind of server rendered views, you can put MailChimp widget there, and then it may not be the best, most elegant solution, but at least it will help you work with things like this fast. But if you think, how will I put into my content feed something like this, then you will probably build another kind of piece of software to manage all these kind of things. But then you, in the end, you kind of lose maybe the purpose of having a content feed and then a simple site generation tool. Because if you think about it, currently Easy is actually in a good position, a very good position, because we have the content API and it's working with the web framework Symfony. So you already kind of have this kind of tools in place, so you don't have to always go full on headless. There's always this middle way that probably is the best way for many cases, that some views might be better to be sort of dynamic, whereas the frame might be something that you build with the old school tool. So it's not also black and white kind of thing. So what if you're working with Easy? Easy Publish as well, but Easy Platform specifically. What tools does it offer for headless CMS development, if you want to call it that? So obviously the number one thing is the solid, comprehensive and extensible REST API to the content repository. So this is something that you already have out of the box. It's actually quite capable because you can do management of content types and sections and a lot of different things that you maybe don't traditionally think about that you would need. So that is obviously the one thing which has been. It's also good that it's been stable for a number of years. So for example, the Easy Studio team also uses the same API, so that's something that you can rely on and trust that it works. The second thing, because the default REST API is quite comprehensive and there's a lot of different kind of things you can do with it. There's a JavaScript client library for the REST API, so it's an abstraction of the REST API that you can use in your browser. So instead of you exactly thinking what kind of headers or queries I want to make to the backend, you can use the REST API to actually create those queries for you. So maybe traditionally you have just sent out some jQuery GET requests and then you will get out some kind of JSON, but this is kind of in between there. So if the backend API, for example, would change, you would need to change your application if you're using the abstraction, which is in the JavaScript application in this case. And obviously, as I quickly spoke about the client library and then the public API, is that because of the Symfony framework, you don't actually need to limit yourself to the REST API that Easy offers, because it's just one of them, or it's an API, it's not a definite API. But for example, for Symfony, there is plenty of different abstractions already for REST, and then there's also some interesting options for other APIs which you might want to use. So you already get a comprehensive toolkit for building your APIs for also. And obviously, because we don't have any for the front end, the visitor front end, we don't have any heavy abstractions or requirements for the specific JavaScript libraries to work, so that you can technically choose whatever you want to use, which is an advantage in this kind of environment where you might have companies that are specialized in some specific framework and some to another, and then you would need to make a choice based on a content management system that always uses, I don't know, React, and versus then that you lose a lot of things if you don't use React and so on. So here, as I discussed, the kind of options for your APIs would be to use the built-in REST API. So all of these are currently thought of as HTTP APIs. So you make an HTTP request and then you get something back. Currently you send a GET request and get some kind of JSON back, but maybe tomorrow it will be some binary format, or you never know where it's going to be, but this is what we currently have. Then there is the exact same, that you can always, of course, create just a complete REST API, what you want to have. If you just create an array and then JSON encode it and send it, well, that's already an API, because it's again the API. It's a nice word. but you probably have already had and built many APIs you just didn't know you did or didn't advertise them as such. And obviously then the option that Symfony and the public API together allow you to build sort of whatever kind of things you would like to do. Yeah, then maybe a few examples of headless things in easy. So one of the most common ones, headless easy, is the platform UI. Platform UI uses internally both the REST client and then obviously the REST API in the backend. So if you do use that, the content section is pretty much sends a lot of requests and handles all of that stuff using that. So that's something that's already there. And now what we'll do today is that we'll create the bike ride demo, or we'll take the bike ride demo and we'll create a simple headless kind of thing. So we're using not actually developing easy at all, but we're developing with JavaScript and then using the client API to fetch content. In this case, you could imagine that you couldn't even touch the other end, but you could, and of course in some cases it's a valid point that you will actually be able to use both of these options. But anyway, it's something that will in some minutes sort of dig into and get started with. So what we will use today, mostly for just that we have some example, there's no opinion on what is the best and what is not. We'll use something called Vue.js. It's technically a front-end Vue library similar to React. The first version was a lot like Angular. The second one still has the same API, but you also have plenty of other options. So it's an interesting option, and why I chose it also was because I haven't actually used it before. But the API and the usage is so simple that we should get things done quite fast, which in this kind of a setting, instead of maybe trying to learn deep, philosophies of how applications should be built, we will try to get moving and get results fast. And in our case, we don't want to build the API now. Yesterday was maybe a better session for that. So we'll use the easy REST API, but we'll use that through the client API. So it's something that you can also see in the administration interface that is being used. So we'll do this in 5 steps. So first of all, we'll take sort of ground zero in this case. So we'll just have the static HTML. That's where we start from. Then we add some of the Vue.js stuff, so that we have the static HTML turned into something that is actually powered by Vue. And then just to keep things a bit stepped, the next thing we add is that the client will log into Easy, because you will need to log in to be able to fetch content in our case. And then we'll work so that we'll use the client API to list content from the system. And then finally we'll have a simple form, because to add new bike rides, this is one of the points where the client API is especially useful for, because creating and publishing content it's not maybe one single step process, because you need to define the fields, and then you will publish or create a draft, and then you will actually publish the draft and so on. But this is something that we'll work with, and then depending on how much time we have, and we might look at merging that as a hybrid. So by hybrid I mean that, as I told you, don't need to go fully headless, so you can actually have the framework of the site still coming from Twig and so on, but some of the more dynamic sections, like latest news articles or something, you might want to have coming from an API. So these are the kind of things that we will go on a high level. Well, now we went on a high level, so you know that we will start with something static and then work step by step, first learning a little bit about the tool, then learning how to integrate that with Easy in general, and then from there on creating a simple listing, and then also manipulating the content repository without actually logging into the admin. What you could then use the exact same principles with the different tools and so on, but these are quite general concepts that should be valuable. So first, because I actually did some additions last minute, so we should first of all open the there's the summer camp workshops, and then it's something called Headless, and then you want to run git pull, then you should get some updates, and then there's also an installation script or reset which we might want to run. So if you run git pull and then run installation reset, and then the installation takes a while to run, so let me know or who is stuck or unable to get to the reset. Yeah, it's master branch in it. Then actually there's tags that one we have, but good. But anyway, before we actually get to do anything, we'll just take a quick look at what we have to start with. I have the link for this static. We'll take a look at it soon. But this is just a static HTML file, which is from, if you attended yesterday, the workshop by David about the basic tutorial. These are the same kind of things, so the context is the same, but obviously the method will be completely different. So this is the idea that you'll be familiar with the same kind of things. Currently it's just a static HTML with no interactivity in it whatsoever. What I do have prepared, so that we don't need to repeat the things that we repeated yesterday, is we have the administration interface. It's already running, and this is actually running without the debug mode, because I didn't actually need the debug mode, because we're not actually going to develop anything related to Easy directly. So that's kind of one of the advantages. So I don't know if this is running debug mode or not. Here at the bottom we have a few examples. So we have my first ride, then Geneva, my favorite ride, and so on. So these are the items that we will have as default for our demo content, and these are obviously just examples of what you might have. The this is sort of our starting point, and from here on we plan to then add more and more functionality as we go, and hopefully then ending up with something that's functional, not obviously complete. It's not running the complete whatever is in the menu, but it's something that is still functional, and you can take at least the concepts back with you from home. So then if we go to the first step, so if you get started with, you should already be, I actually have, instead of branches, I have tags. So you should be able to check out step 1. And then I wonder if I could maybe make this one bigger.
When I ran the script, it's telling me my head is detached.
Yeah, but it's
Checking out is step 1.
Yeah, because it's so then if you open the PHP Storm, where we will be working is not under source directory or app directory or anything. I just have a separate static directory under here. So this now has just some additional rewrite rules that we don't actually end up rendering through easy at all. But in here we have some basic things which we will then gradually build up and move forward with. So this is something that we will get started with, and for the first complete step I will do so that wait a minute. We'll start with adding the basic things for Vue. So I will, so that I don't mess too much time up with live coding things. So we'll go through the steps, or you can follow by typing, and if you have any questions, please do ask. But it's probably best that I will do this myself, and then I will walk through what we have been adding here. Good. So first of all, maybe a brief introduction to the Vue product. So it's something that runs completely on the client side. The version 2 can support server-side rendering as well, but that's not something that we will get too much into. So I will actually flip over to the full screen view. So when you're working with client-side applications, obviously what we'll do then is we'll need to first import the Vue library itself. So this library will allow you to do templating and a lot of different things. It's not a complete framework, so it's sort of more similar to React rather than Angular, because it's not a complete set. So in this case we'll just use the Vue library, which I think that's where the name comes from, or I don't know what other is the Vue comes from. So we'll just begin by importing this library, and then once we have the library loaded, then the second step that we will need to do is to add a script also for our application, and in this case our application is called bikerides.js. The bikerides.js, it actually seems pretty big already, but the structure is really small. The most of the things that we have here is placeholder data for the initial view that we display. So in this case, for example, most of the things that we have here built in JavaScript objects is the data that we have in the end coming from easy. So in this case, what we have is Toulouse image, then title, then we have another one, and then we have another one, and so on. So that is the bulk of it. The data section, if we take it away, you can see that it's most of it, because the API itself is really small. So you just create a new view, and you create a new, or you select an element which it should attach to, which is something that we'll take a look at next. So this is why I chose it, because it's so simplistic. And if I can only maybe undo things, but a bulk of it is anyway related to the rides themselves. So by default, if we just load this one, it won't do anything, because it's not. If let's say I put this to zap and then save, and then if I return here, it will actually now fail, because you can see that let me see if I can actually zoom in this case. You can see that this is template code. The template code is something that you have a number of different options for. You can use, if you are familiar with React and the JSX format, that is something you can also use. But now what we're seeing here is the template for default template format or language, which was from the Vue 1.0. The nice thing about it is that it looks familiar, because it looks like Twig. It's not Twig, but it's similar. And actually, if you work with Angular 1, it's sort of similar to Angular 1. Actually, the whole example that we have here, it's quite familiar to Angular 1 developers. But in any case, so if we now disabled or created the new Vue instance, the Vue instance is, instead of being assigned to the app container, it's now been set to the zap. So then it doesn't know what to do. So then it obviously just, the browser renders the templates regularly. But if we head over to the index.html, you can see that this is where we have our two parts. And then what's notable here next is that we have the app. It's just an identifier, so it's a DOM element. In this case, it's an ID, and we set it to app. You could also reuse something completely existing, but I decided I will wrap it in another div. And this is also worth noting that we currently now, if I enable this zap, which I think is actually, then we should be able to get the results rendered. So now you can see the whole Vue library part is working as expected. So that is something that we got past. And what's worth noting that if I think nowadays any kind of web project should have a front-end architecture of some sorts, because now in many cases you have a lot of the complexity is also on the front-end side, and if you make these kind of decisions very lightly that we'll just use something, I don't know, and then somebody else uses something, you might be in an exactly the same kind of mess as you may be if you create an easy site and then somebody decides to write, I don't know, some section of the website in Ruby, which will work, but if nobody else then knows Ruby, then that will be a problem and so on. But in this case, for example, that it's a nice sort of sidetrack, that here the view, it's just one single application, but you could actually have multiple of these applications. So, for example, if you would have a calculator or something, or loan calculator, you might have that, and then you would have something else completely. And these kind of components on the front end is something that is in general more and more trending on the front end in general. So this is sidetrack, but in general it's good to notice that you can start thinking about the website not as one giant thing which was either server generated or front end generated, but it's more of a combination of things. You can even take it a little bit further if you think about ESI and combining different backend bits and pieces. But for this case, we just have the single listing there. Then, moving forward, this is all the example layout that we have from the package. Here, what we do get to next is simply the data and displaying the data. So in this case, we're using the view in the mode that it adds, or you create templates simply by writing inline templates, adding new attributes. There are many other ways also you could do this, but this is very good for visualizing and seeing how things work. But here, for example, it's not exactly the same as you would have in Twig, but it's very close. Here you add an attribute which is specific to view, and it's a for loop, and then for each rides, one ride. And where this comes from, it comes from the model that we have defined. So this is the view model, or whatever you want to call it. Maybe I'll call it model. You have just the data here, and then you have something within. You can add more of these, or you can remove something that you might not need. But in our case, we have just a placeholder for the sample that we have. So here we have the image, and then from, to, and distance, and so on. But it's very much exactly the same as you would work with any kind of templating system, whether it's Easy Publish 4 or Twig or whatever, or even raw PHP. But it's similar still. Here's one thing which was actually a bit special, because for some reason the image attribute needs to be binded in a special way for the image actually to be rendered, because I don't now have any definite insight into why, but it's anyway a technical reason that it doesn't know how to render the image correctly if it don't set this special parameter, and this is specific to view and so on. But most of the other things work as you might expect. So you have some ride author, this is one individual ride, then whatever I would add here, something like this, I would expect it to be reflected here. So this is something that you are familiar with from other tools, and of course depending on how complex or more and more complex you would like to make things, to add, let's say, internationalization or string translations and so on. This is extensible, but for our cases we don't have any translations today. But where the loop in our case now ends is the ending table row. So we just loop a bunch of table rows and get the end result, which looks like this. So that's pretty much more or less what there is to the basic view functionality. There is obviously a lot of things that you could add to how to link to individual items to get render specific views and so on, or specific, let's say, content views and so on. But you can see that it's now kind of dynamic, but it's not coming from easy. It's all done in the front end and so on. But this is sort of the background, and probably if you were to do a real project such as this, I would probably quite early on create some kind of a mock-up data feed that then you can start working with, because in this case, for example, the front-end developer or whoever is working on the public site can actually start working as soon as you have some kind of idea of the content structure. Because here in our example case, we got the HTML template ready-made, and that gave us enough idea of what to get started with. But that's pretty much it for the second step. The first step being starting from kind of scratch. So here we loaded the library and app script, which library was just technically adding some scripts and so on. We created the apps. So the app in our case was just a specific instance of view with an identifier, and then we also defined the dummy data model there, and that's how we got started. Then what we did also need to do is we define the app container in our template, and then created the simple template, which is something that now that we're working in this way, we don't actually need to redo it, because we'll just replace the data with data coming from easy instead of the hard-coded stuff. So in this case, it's a nice, probably if you've been working with standard Symfony-based things, you might also want to, instead of when creating a navigation, for example, you might not even need to create or start creating a website layout by having the actual complete dynamic structure for the menu, but you might want to mock it up so you can get on with this one, and then possibly somebody else could in the back end write the content queries and prepare the whole thing, whereas your navigation will actually be already defined to be what navigation usually has. So you have some kind of tree-like structure probably, and then basic links, and maybe before you used to have that, is this the first link or the last link, but that was mostly for CSS. But anyway, this is now, if you want to follow, you can check out step 2 if you already didn't do so, or because it might be, I don't know, if it might be a bit hard to follow. But these, again, were nothing to do with easy, so you could take any kind of backend or leave it just like this. But then in the next step, we'll move forward with connecting this dummy data into easy, and not by working with making handcrafted requests and defining what headers we want to send and so on. But we'll begin by adding the client API and the login. So in our case, we don't actually need the login yet, because we'll need the login later to be able to create content. But now it's enough that we will be able to read. And in this case, I will check out step 3. I will remove that. So in the next step, we should get something more. Okay, we got a message that the login is okay. So in this step, the only goal really is to be able for the client to log into easy. And this is what it does currently. So how this is handled is using the client API. I can post the link to the slides so you can find the links. Here there's the client side API, or using the JavaScript REST API client. And this is the way which we don't need to write sort of low-level specific code, but it will allow us to abstract on top of the client, which abstracts then the underlying REST API, which is actually something that we might want to take a look at quickly. So before we dive into the code, we'll take a quick inspect, and then let's see the console. Good. Let me see, I don't actually use this one, net. Okay. Yeah, but here you can actually see it's not the most efficient way, because it deletes and then it logs in, but you can see that it actually sends requests in the backend to log the user in. In this case, it's not a very good, because we define the admin password in the code, but obviously all of the REST calls in any case will be subject to all the permissions, things that you have in the backend. So that's obviously one big advantage of using Easy and the REST API, because if I'm logged in as admin, which I am now, I will be able to create content, but if I would be logged in as somebody else, then I won't be. And obviously, because the code is running on the client side, I could modify the code and set that my login username is admin, and then I could maybe see even the admin functionalities, but when I would try to get data from the backend, if I'm not actually admin user identified to the backend, then I won't be able to do anything. So obviously you need to consider, maybe in some cases, that this application that we're now building, anybody will be able to see the code if they want to. So you maybe don't want to have, links generated to public user profiles, and then you could maybe guess URLs, because obviously when you're working in this way, you're more open for inspection of code or just looking at the code, whereas when you're working with traditional server-side applications, the server-side application can be, I don't know, horrible spaghetti or whatever, but nobody will ever know because nobody will ever, see. But here it's obviously more evident, and this is especially if you do some kind of more sensitive or administration kind of things. Obviously, if you work with the Easy API, you will never accidentally, unless you do silly things like we do here, which is log in as admin in plain text. But that's the easiest way in our case. But these are the kind of considerations that you also need to take in some cases. But if we then quickly head back to the slides and get back out of the security concern section, which was random, but I'm sure it's useful. So what we add is the client API script, and what that means is just that in the index we had a reference to the Easy Client API. So it's just a path that's distributed with the Easy, and then it's technically just JavaScript file which has a bunch of functions that you can use to interact with the REST API without making the raw calls yourself. This is something that gets updated, and it can add new features. So technically there's no versioning scheme, as far as I know, exactly yet for this. So if you update Easy, the client API may be updated as well. So if you do decide to build an application using the client API, you may want to get a version for yourself of the script. But this is something that you might want to take extra care and consider if you do use this one. Because especially when platform moves to 2.0, there might be or more changes in the back end. But in any case, the key here is that we get JavaScript from Easy to the client. You don't have to distribute it through Easy or through the bundles. You can get it yourself. But that's pretty much it for the inclusion. Again, it doesn't do anything by itself, so just you add that. It just includes something that you will call, but then the additional thing that we did, which you could see in the page that we loaded, is I added the message here. This is using Bootstrap, so it's kind of a Bootstrap alert box. And it's just for easier debugging, that we can see that login is okay, and this is just where the message is output. You could add more interesting logic or whatever, but this is one place you might want to do this. And then obviously if we want to see whether that message is actually working or not, we can first of all, let's get back. So in our case, I actually added a few more properties to the view object or instance. So I added a message, which is just the message. There's a search word field. I don't think I actually use it, but it's just a new attribute. You can create any. We still have our rides as hard-coded, so we don't load anything yet. Then I decide that I will actually create the content API and content service, I will create them in the context of this Vue instance. So if I would have multiple of these kind of mini applications on a site or on a page, then I might want to have something. Let's say I might need different versions of the content API if that were to happen. But this is something that then you can do. Next up is for Vue. It's, I don't know, what would you call it, a magic method, but it's sort of a constructor. So when this is created, it will run simply the created function from within, and then we will get an alert, and this is pretty much what you can yourself work with or do whatever kind of initialization you may want. In our case, the initialization part is logging in and creating so that the application is ready to communicate with Easy when we're done. And within the credentials section, it's just a JavaScript object, and you can actually see that you can also use an existing session if you want to, but that's something that is documented, how to do this. And these are, what's notable is these are the exact same tools that are used by the administration interface. So in that case, you can see, for example, that we don't really make any kind of changes to anything else than the username, but we should get now login failed. So just because we have a failed login, now if I were to have already our either creation script or creation form, it won't work because this client is not actually logged in. But now that we are logged in, and let's see, so it's good, and it's actually not very efficient because it logs in each time you load the page, even though you probably already have a session. But then moving forward, this is where we instantiate a new client API. I don't know how to pronounce Cappy. It sounds like some funny name for a captain or something. But here, what's notable is that we actually define the URL for where our Easy is. It could actually not be in the whole same application. So here we all run, headless websc / statics / index, but what you don't actually need to run within this context, you could run completely separate applications. You might have some issues with maybe cross-platform, but you might, I don't actually know the headers, but in this case you can see that this one creating the kind of connection to the content repository, you define where the content repository is, and then you use the Easy session authentication agent to log in. So we'll use the credentials and then pass the credentials object here, and then we have a new content API. We could actually see that what is in there. Because I haven't actually seen what is in there. Console logging. Wait a minute. Debug. No, inspect. Okay, yeah. So it's actually, I don't usually use this, but you can then again worth noting when working with client-side thing as opposed to server-side thing. I can inspect and see what is running here. So here there's content service, get user service, and so on. So this is obviously one where you might want to also work with debugging things and trying to figure out how things work. But in any case, this is what we get. So now we have a valid connection. The next step is the content service. So content service is technically a helper to help you work with the content repository, and it requires the connection. So we just create also a shortcut to that within the context of this specific view instance. And then this is just all JavaScript silly things. So you needed to have the scoping like this and that, but this is something that if you don't know what this is and will work with modern JavaScript, you don't need to know this, and so on. But in any case, then after we have the basics content service set, then we simply use the content API, and then we log in. And then within the login, I think this is a common JS practice or module practice to first have the error here and then the response. And after that, it's pretty straightforward that it tries to log in. If there is an error, then it will log that. Let's actually see then what is in the error. Is there any details? But then in this case, for example, the only thing that we do is we set that the message for the latest message, so we don't actually have any queue, we just have a single message at all points. So that is now login failed. And then let's see what we got. Oh, maybe we'll put a lot of these away. Ah, yeah, because it doesn't actually fail, so I need to make it fail. So I will change the login to something else, and then we will get an error. So there's connection error 401 details, yada yada. So anyway, you can also get additional details when you need to debug things if they don't work. But then here, if there's an error, it returns no ports. But if it does continue, it sets message to login is okay, good. And because this is already preparation for the next step of our application, we define that after a successful login, we will want to refresh the bike ride list. So by refreshing the bike ride list view, the library allows you to set any methods pretty much that you want to be able to call. It's up to you how you want to do these. But in this case, we add a simple function which defines the bike ride list, and we don't even define anything what is there because we have already those in the object available for consumption. And the only thing that we do in this specific spot is we do a search, and that's all that is done. And that is what we have now. Then there's some minutes to the break might be like 7 minutes. I'm just wondering what would be the best way to move forward. Maybe we'll start by quickly reviewing what we have done. So we added the client API script, which is just something that we don't have to create ourselves, a login functionality. Then we added the simple constructor, which actually this is in the wrong order, but the constructor we added the constructor, so then it initializes things that it's up and ready for action each time one is created. And then finally, our final step was to successfully log in or this client logged into Easy. But this data here, obviously we haven't done anything to that. So how it works is it will just take anything that is set as the current data and define that to be the valid state. We might want to, for example, now in preparation, just get started by removing or maybe setting this to an empty array, and it doesn't fail, but there's nothing in there. This is actually one of the things that you might hear sometimes, which is also a disadvantage for this kind of approach, because the initial load that you do, even with this full data, it will first send you, if you see there's still a flashing, that it shows the unrendered template language. So there are also solutions for you to take this same exact thing and then render it on the Sun client side so that it's ready. What it is why you should care is that for the first page load, it will be faster, especially on mobile, if you just send the whole thing, and then it can pick up to an existing DOM and then get started to working there. What I think it's kind of not counterproductive but still dangerous is then you also start complicating your whole setup, because then your server setup becomes that you have multiple kind of different tools again running, and then it might be that in the end that you might have wanted be better off to build it completely sort of old school or then as a hybrid solution. So let's say that this ride list would be not the main content on the page, that it could be list of most read articles or something like that, or something else that is very dynamic that could benefit from having this. And obviously these kind of views are also it's more comfortable and easier to work with these for information collectors. So if you have let's say a voting widget, you probably have anyway your voting widget will be using JavaScript to send AJAX things and things like that. This is something where you can absolutely not limit to just content or the same approaches you might have. You should use for both content data, or not content, but data and content, because again, if we talked about the front-end architecture considerations, I think it makes sense that you handle everything with the same kind of gravity, that it's all something and nothing is, because often in front-end things are still kind of an afterthought, and then the maintenance becomes pretty horrible. Probably a lot of you have worked on some, jQuery is still a very valid tool. It has a great API to do things. But during maybe 5 years ago at least, it was always, beginning is nice, just 5 lines of jQuery, but then soon it was pretty hard to maintain, and it never really, like, at least some of the TypeScript developers say that JavaScript easily becomes read-only code because it's so dynamic and maybe sometimes hard to understand many different ways of writing it. But anyway, this is some of the things. But we have, I think, the break now. So the next step will be then to actually use the content that we had in Easy, and then view that from within this site. So that's a time for the coffee break now. But if you have any questions during this time or later, you're welcome to talk to me while I drink coffee. So what we got was we used the client-side API or the client API to log in, and technically we have now a connection to Easy here. And the next step, what we wanted to do was to actually fetch some content. So all of this has essentially been boilerplate up until this point. But finally, now in step 4, we'll load content, and then we'll actually need to do something which is a bit annoying, which is simplifying values, which we'll see soon, which is something that it's not optimal, and I'm sure for the REST API being very general, it needs to have that, but we'll find out more soon. Good. So if you do want to follow on your local machine or environment, you can check out the step 4. Let me close that one. So step 4, git dash, and then step 4, and here the next step for us is to do the actual content query. We'll do some experimentation also because I have a functioning version, but we can also try to do a little bit of modifications on that, so we're not hard set on anything specific. And this is actually a bit lacking, but manage complex output values to ensure proper display of the content, because as you are aware, some of the content types in Easy are quite complex. Not just the rich text, but also things like images. It's not just an image URL, it's actually different variations of that. And you have metadata such as width and height and things like that. So we'll need to do some additional work for that on the client side, because of the client being so, or the client API being so generic, and it needs to be because it is serving, or the reason, maybe I will go quickly through here, the reason why the client API is so generic and granular is because it is actually built to serve the primarily the administration interface, and in the administration interface you will need to have a lot of access to things that a site's visitor doesn't actually need to have access to. So that's maybe, if you think, why does it have to be like this? Well, I think that's the reason why some of the things are like that. But then we'll hop back to the slides for just a few moments. So we'll do the content query, manage the output. There's a few links which I will follow, just for resources that you will see, but we'll check and get started with what we have. So going back to our code, so again, you remember that we ended up in this location where we have the do search. I have actually kept this do search here, but I can now remove that. So where we're hopping back from is to refresh the bike ride list, and then this is where we start off. One thing that before we move to the actual content editing, it's worth noting that now our rides array doesn't have anything in it. So there's no more of that dummy content, but it was technically just removed. So that's just one notice. Then let's move back to refresh bike ride list. So this takes into use the content service that we got from the content API or the client API. I don't know if it's content or client, maybe client. And what this gives us is you can think of it as a front-end equivalent to the PHP API with criterions and so on. So you do queries and create structs if you create content using that in the backend. So it's essentially that, but adapted for the front end. And technically, again, what it is an abstraction for the REST API, because if we see the REST API calls, what you make, for example, let's see if I head over here, and then I will put the browser tools, and then let's see if we put the net tab on. I hope we should see when I click edit, you can see that there's, just for the edit view, there's it loads object, then it checks the user, and it does a lot of things. And if you were to do all of this manually, the probability that you forget to do one of these things is quite high. So this is why we have the abstraction on, so you don't even need to worry about all of these things. Again, if you need a simple API to serve content, you might not need all the complexity, but especially for creation of new items and so on, this is very, very worthwhile to have, and so on. But then if we hop back to the editor, so here, again, this is some old school JavaScript thing, this and that thing, don't worry, it's just unnecessary evil. But here we create a new query. We should actually have that as our query. Then we get this current object's content service, and that content service then will head and add a new view create struct. So it's a preparation for getting content. The next is just a name. So you could call it X bike rides view or something like that. This might have something to do for advanced usage, but for me, at least in this demo, it's just a name for this view struct. And then the next parameter is key, that this is a content query. And probably what you're wondering is that how do I find out these kind of things, that what is available for these. There is, for the client API, there's a version of or documentation which is generated from the code, and it's under Easy Systems GitHub IO, JavaScript REST client, and so on. So this is actually maybe some kind of a hidden gem because I don't see much references to this. So anyway, but here, this is where you can find out a lot about what goes in and how things work. So here, for example, there's one example again. You can see there's content service, load root, and then that's the standard. So you have the error and then the response, and then this will load up using the REST API in the backend, the individual root location of that specific easy installation. Anyway, there's plenty of things, and we won't go into all of these in detail, but just for you to have an idea of what kind of operations you can do using this tool, because the content operations in the admin are using this. You can obviously load locations by remote ID, load root. You can also delete objects and object states, copy subtrees, and a lot of these things which some of these you probably have used, maybe using PHP or something. And if you are familiar with the easy terminologies and concepts, these are something which is probably very familiar to you, and you can see that it is actually pretty complete. And instead of you creating, seeing a lot of work to do something which is quite, maybe trivial, in the end is setting an object state for a content object to do some basic, let's say, version or workflow, like approval workflows or something like that. Because one of the things that you maybe would like to do with this kind of thing is to have these administration interfaces, which is very limited to something specific. You could do them with a PHP API as well, but this is another option. But then, all in all, here is what we have. And let's see, for example, the new view create struct. Let's just do some copy pasta. And then there's a search. Okay. Maybe some demo effect. What? New view create struct. Yeah. But anyway, it returns a struct used to create a new REST view content service. So these are the kind of things that then, as you can see, I didn't kind of need to discover everything I found out for this from the code. So these are generated from the actual source. So these are there as comments, and that's why it's instead of using the raw power of search and replace and find and whatever classic methods, this is one thing that you should look at. But in any case, we're not here to read the API documentation directly. So let's return back to the concepts and just assume that we found this now from there. But then we have now a content query, but the content query, as you would expect, doesn't do anything by itself. What you need to do to actually make queries is you want to put criteria in it. So similar to the PHP API, you can set a number of different options. So from things like a limit or content class, or it's exactly the same concepts, except this one works on the client side, so you don't need to handcraft your specific calls to the backend each time, but you can technically use this high-level abstraction. If your API, if you don't use the easy REST API for some reason, I would still advise you to have some kind of an abstraction of similar sort, because it will help you manage the complexities, because you will repeatedly do the same things over and over again. But in this case, this isn't self-explanatory, but if you look through the documentation, you can find that you need to put the view input and set the content query criteria. And here we set the content type identifier criterion to be RIDE. There's a lot of other options as well, as we can soon maybe check and do some experimentation. But let's say at this point we won't do that, but what we'll do is do a quick refresh. And now, as you can see, this is actually now coming from Easy, the backend. We can try maybe to see if the caching is something that I haven't studied very in detail, but if I will just quickly do some editing, I will modify this, and this is obviously in the admin. This admin then obviously use the same functionality to talk to the backend, but now this myRide modified is here, and then if we refresh, you can see that is up to date. So it's the same things, and I mean this is kind of not obvious, and you would expect it to be, but it still was kind of interesting to see, and the possibilities that you can think of it when expanding the kind of same concepts from the back end to the front end and getting this kind of items. So for example, if we would now like to do some basic changes here, so for example, let's start with a simple one. So another content query option is obviously the limit. So instead of doing any kind of crafting with the queries themselves, I will set the limit to 2, and yes, we get 2 items. And in the back end, what I keep talking about as abstraction is that I don't know what kind of queries are going back and forth. It's not my business. I want to work with this quite high-level API to get content. So if we now refresh, and then maybe if we just put the net, you can see that there's actually quite a bit of content going over. There's the get, and then here's the view, and let's see what is actually what view input. Yeah, so these are the kind of this is the kind of data that the abstraction sends. So you can just imagine how much it would take for you to work and hand build this kind of objects, because then you probably wouldn't want to use the API at all, because it's so much work, which I agree would be so much work for me to. Let's see if I can maybe expand this a little bit higher. If I were to get 2 articles, and if I would need to craft an object with a view input identifier bike rides view, maybe it's actually useful that the backend knows the kind of view that I want, because I might want to have a specific type of template for images, for example, or something. That might be a reason. But then you can see that it relays those to the backend. The key here being that it's called the type criterion is ride, which is why we only get rides. We could probably take that away and then it would fail completely because our front end doesn't really prepare for displaying images directly and so on. But these are the kind of functions. You can also see that there's the facet builders. So once the Solar integration moves forward, you don't sort of miss functionality, because this is something that needs to be updated. It's not voluntary for easy to work with this, because the whole administration interface is built on it, so it's technically compulsory to keep this up to date. Let me see. Well, I don't know how to maybe get the response back. Yeah, but anyway, with these tools now, I can't now locate it, but you will get some kind of JSON back, and so this is what kind of things we're getting back. And let's see if we do still some. Oh yeah, one thing which is obviously here is also, which you will need probably for a lot of things. If you have pagination or next 5 items things, okay, now I broke something. Yeah, you anyway get offsets and so on. So these kind of things, because pagination even can be quite time consuming if you solve it over and over again, which many people do. I have some bad there, but anyway.
Because of the location carry, content carry, or the two different carries? Let's check the code. One is content carry, the other one is location carry.
Oh, there. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Because yeah, that's actually sharp. Let's see. So this, yeah, the modified one is actually gone away. So similar to what you're working with the public or the PHP API, you know that you're working with content objects and locations, and the similar or the same exact distinction is here. In our case, what we did with a query was a content query, not a location query. So it's the same kind of thing that you need to keep in mind when working with the API. But again, for me, it was kind of fast to pick up the concepts, because the concepts are the same. But good. Let me just, then we can define that one and then maybe have it back to 3, and then that's what we get, which is what we want. Then we'll take a look at this criterions and other things maybe a bit later, because then moving forward, again, syntax is obviously JavaScript syntax, but then we create a view, and then for the view we pass a query object, and again in the same CommonJS format we pass the error, or the error is here and the response is here. If for some reason the whole thing doesn't work out, I don't know, it might probably not work out if I misspell something. Like, yeah, let's see if I get the log, so console, and then logging. Yeah, you can see that it, you know, then we can get more information on exactly what went wrong. But this is all happening on the browser side for us. So let's get that one correct, and then exactly the same before it fails. Then we exit. Then, just as you would probably simplify, or you probably should simplify the results that you get from the public API when you're working with a PHP version, you probably want to distill it to actually send or get only the items that you want passed to the template. It's exactly the same in this case, the templated target is not Twig. The templating target is the Vue templating engine, which is exactly the templating engine in essence. So then the object, what is returned, I'm sure for some reason it's the structure is very deep, and it might take you some time to figure out what you want. So if I console log this one, so I'll console log the response, because this is a raw JavaScript object, still what I get from there. So this should be quite okay. True. Console log, and then here, yeah, you can see that the object again, because it's raw and not maybe for very low level things, but you can still get a lot of information already inside, and what you should do is just discover it yourself. But the concepts are familiar to people working with Easy. So from one way to another, each now with the client API, both paths actually lead to the same concepts. So instead of you creating maybe a custom API, and then your custom API will call something like content, and then maybe they will have, I don't know what you would call them, nodes or something that you invent, and then somebody else comes and is this related to Easy or is this something that you created? But the advantage here is that it's the same sort of official APIs, both of these. And then returning to here, let's remove that. So anyway, I just, for readability, I just get the search hits, and then I loop through the search hits. So I create bike ride object. The bike ride object, there is no schema or some definition, it's all very dynamic. So beforehand we had the individual bike rides were defined here, but there's no specific definition of it, and JavaScript in general is very a dynamic language, but in this case we'll just build our object on the fly to have the fields that we want. And then talking about individual fields, here we start looping through the search hits. So these are similar concepts, because if you use the search service in the PHP API, you also get search hits, and we loop those. And in this case, what we do is we get the fields, and we can actually take a look at what the fields are, and that should give you more idea on what we have. Okay, did I miss something again? Yes. Yep. So anyway, here we get an array of objects. It's a JavaScript array of objects, and within that array of objects, there's objects, and this is one individual field. So field definition identifier, it's the same as you would expect. It's something that we'll use as a key because it's clear. Field value in this case is very, it's a string, so it's my first ride modified, which is the one that modified. Then we get the ID. Maybe you might have use for the ID at some point. Then you also get the language code, which, I don't know, maybe if you're working with multilingual content, then you might, if you have a site with fallback languages, then you might get multiple values, and then you would need to handle that on the front-end side, which is, again, sort of something that you might need not to worry when you're working with the twig templating, because it already gives you functionality for that. But in any case, this is quite straightforward. Author, in this case it's a string. But next up is the description. The description is not displayed here, but it's a rich text field. And if let's see actually what happens if I simply remove this one. So here I'm just again creating something, but now we had, well, description is one thing. You can see there's the XML value and then there's the XHTML value, and the XHTML value is obviously the one you probably in this case will want to show, but because it is empty we won't take a look at that. Difficulty level is one thing which is good, but what we really want, what I'm looking for is the image, where this one, yeah. So the image, you could see that we have images. For example, this right has an image, and the image value, field value, is the object, and then you have a lot of the usual metadata that you might expect. So variations, you also have the large version, you have a lot of different versions. Actually, the medium version then refers to another location where there's different version of that. So you can see that these, if you want, you know, an image, it's not that straightforward. And if I will now refresh this. You can see that now we get objects dumped. It's actually the complete object. But if we would take, let's say, what was it? It was field value. Field value is the most simple plain text value, which is very good for most items. So field value. So if field value, now this mostly looks good, except the image is not visible, and the level, which is a selection, it's actually an empty array, because there's actually no level selected. But if we go back here quickly to this edit view, and then we'll modify this again, and if I set the difficulty level for this one to be intermediate, and then publish, here, now this one actually has a value. This one is now set to an array with one as the value. But you can see that now you need to do things to actually simplify the values into something that a client, in this case is the browser, and I guess most of the cases that you would use this API, the client API, would be what you get. But this is why, if I return here, and here we have the fields, I can remove that. So I have a method called getSimpleValue. This is something that I had to write myself. I don't know if there is like an official one, but for now at least, and for this training, it's this good that we use this one. So what it sets is another, again, I kept everything here, but of course if you would have many projects or many things that you continuously redo and do and do, and if you have your own custom field types that are very complex, you would probably want to take this into some kind of library that then you include when you need to simplify. Let's say that you have a complex data type for bus rides or transportation lines have in one data type you have two locations and then maybe root and location and maybe some availability or class or whatever. You will probably need to still, in many cases, somehow simplify it. But in this case, what we get is we get the value, and then that value is just we check that what is the identifier. This is a description because this should be done using the field type value or the field's type instead of the field's identifier. But I couldn't find it at this point, and then I kind of left it as is. But in any case, so if this is a description, then I just dumbly return what I think should be returned now. And for the image, I will take the default version, what it gives. But you remember that there was additional things, which were the different versions of that image. This logic could be, immensely complex and lead to somewhere completely different. It could, it would actually need to make a new request and then get that new version of the image and then return whatever you wanted and so on. But this is a very simplified example of how you could do this. And difficulty is one, which was the selection with different options. It could also be multiple values. This is also hard-coded here. So I just hard-coded a simple array of 3 different levels and then define that now that we load this one, this should be intermediate, and this is not set because no value was set, and that simply comes from here that unless this matched, then I return not set. And then in the end, it just returns the field value by default. So if none of these match, so for example for title, I don't have any matching, so it then by default, because most of the time it was a simple string value. But here, then what we got in the end was, depending on the field's identifier in this case, what it should be is field type, and then that bike ride object, which just populates all the fields, gets returned and is set as the rides object for this specific view, which was the same one that we originally had, or that I just created the same structure, but we don't need to do anything additional with the template, because we started with the mock version that was exactly the same as the version that we built here. Again, you could do this in multiple different ways. This is just one example, but as I said, to just create this kind of an example, this is what I started with. Then we have just 30 minutes left, so I think we'll have a quick look at the criterions that are available, but we won't spend too much time experimenting with them, so we don't get stuck. These were quite hard to find, or they're not. I didn't find the documentation because the parsing of the values is done by the backend. So whatever you define in the query as criterion, where was that? Here. This criterion, these don't exist in the client. So the client doesn't know if there is something to do with this or not. So this is parsed in the backend as some REST server input parser criterion. So you could extend it to be able to parse whatever kind of things that you send to it. But here you can see a few of quite common ones. I use the content type identifier, which was self-explanatory. Then there's full text search, a field, location ID if you're doing things, and then there's the logical and or similar things to the queries. And as I told that maybe the documentation for these wasn't, or maybe I didn't find it, but it was quite easy still to read. So let's see language code. So it extends the base parser and language code, criterion, explode. Yeah, so it then translates it to the PHP API one. So it's just as it said that it's a parser that takes one to another. So if you would have something that's very complex, like, I don't know, get latest items approved by administrator or something, you could potentially write in JavaScript a really large one or really complex query. But if you're more familiar and comfortable with writing the PHP API ones, what I would find maybe the best way is just to then write a similar parser and then have that complexity in the parser instead of JavaScript client. It might actually be a better option. And in many cases, this is a good example of how much of the limitations and these functionalities are actually powered by the backend and not. In some parts, the front end is kind of dumb, but coupled with the calls to the backend, it can be leveraged to be quite powerful. That sends that value, and let's still review what we had. So in this section or step, what we got was a list of all rides. We didn't use a single JavaScript XHR query ourselves. We just used the API. We did have to do some mangling of the values so that we get things here as expected, but it's still quite nice experience to work without really low-level things, because if you would need to create those and craft the objects, then it would be quite a bit of work. But then if we step to section 5, which is add a simple form to create new rides, because I think it's really kind of very easy to do content reads from a custom API, maybe even writes, but this is something that then you can also use to create new content, and you actually do. I have actually used the same functionality when I have been making modifications here. Well, not create, but modify. So here, I'll jump over and then I'll check out. Check out step 5. Okay, what steps here were to add a form and set an action to that form using the same view library object, and then we create so that we have a method again to actually create items, and then obviously we need to refresh the view after we have created new items. So we don't rewrite that because we already have it. It's called once when you load it, but we can call it again and again. And here's some details again, but if we get back to the code here and take a look at the index, because here we should have some changes now. Let's see, I added it, I think, at the bottom. Yes. So here, within the boundaries of our application now, which is just defined by the HTML, I define here our model to have a new ride object and then a title for that, and then a button which has an action for when you click the button you create a new ride. And this is all just on the template level, so there's nothing yet here. But as you can see from here, we have a new ride, and for simplicity at least, I now added just the title field, but you could pass obviously other fields as well. Certain fields like images and relations or something might be more complex, but you should be able to read up on the details, either from the admin code or then the rest or the API documentation. But in any case, now we have this one. It's defined as to be the title of a new ride object, and then just clicking will trigger something. And what we trigger is we trigger again. We haven't created any new files. It's just one giant file, which you might want to organize into somehow smaller reusable bits if you were to get into Vue or some other specific library. So here, again, because we're working with the API, we're using the location struct, and every content that is created needs to have a location. And in this case, I don't know why. Maybe there's a specific reason. I would have expected this to be a /12, for example. But then I read the I actually experimented with this, and it didn't work as I expected. So then I had to read the manual, and then the manual actually showed that you need to make these kind of something more complex. So you need to specify the API path where you are creating items. But in any case, once you have this one, then you actually need, similar to when you're working with a PHP API, you will need to create a content create struct. And this is again new or content create struct. And then I again hard-coded the ID to be 13. What you would probably want to do is somehow make this better configurable rather than having these hard-coded things here and there. But this is just the content type ID. So if we go to the admin, content types, content, this is ID number 13. So it's, well, if you work with Easy, you have the IDs. Then the actual content create struct requires you to have a location for it. You cannot create content without location. This is what I found out from the manual, or I mean, all of this code is some I read through the details in the API documentation, and then you also need to define the language. In this case, I just hard-coded the language to be ENGGB, but of course it can be anything. Then to this content create struct, I add a field title. Then this again, it's the new ride title. This is just this is obviously this instance of the app, Vue app. Then the new ride, because it could have more. So then I just set this field here to have the ID of rides or new ride and title. Of course, I could just have ride title or new ride title, but sort of just to keep it extensible. Then Yep.
I can't wait. What will happen if we have a required field and we just don't fill it?
It will return fail. The API will return the fail.
But we don't get a proper message from is it published? Is it granted?
We can try. Yeah, so anyway, the question was that if you have required fields defined, and if you try to create content without a required field, so in this case, for example, we should be able to modify bike ride, because I think it's a good location or place to do where you might have errors like this. So let's just see that. First of all, I would urge to do initial validation in the browser. So if a field is required, there's HTML5 attributes for it being required, because instead of you might want to create a form and actually try to submit it and then use the browser functionality. But in this case, to return to the question, so here we can see that the ride has a number of different fields. The title field is actually not required, which it should be. But then we have an author, which is not required. I'll set that to be the case. Good. So we made a change. We should actually be able to. Yeah.
I guess we should have done another field, like because title we are filling it anyway.
Yeah, but I will replace title with something else now. Yeah. Yeah. So I will take the title and replace it with author. I will also replace it here, so the placeholder, just so that it makes more sense. Good. So let's save that one. And then we have now the author field. Let's see what happens when we try to use the API to publish it. So server logging net probably. I want that to be shown, maybe shown. So then I'll create my name. Create a new ride. Okay, bad request. So the client doesn't know that it's not valid. You could probably add, logic. The more logic you add to the front end, the less complex it will be. But in this case, for example, the tool. Yeah, so it says bad request. How do I actually see what comes back from here? Cookies, no headers. But anyway, location create, that should be fine. Then let's see, fields, object. So here we should just have the author field. I don't now, in this tool, it will have a JSON which has additional information. Probably it will say that title field not required or not set required. It gives you descriptive error messages, but in any case, in this case, it gave us an error. But we should be able to now, obviously, if we want another field, we will just no, not like that. It's not even easy to copy paste for me now. But we'll set this one to be title, and then new ride title. Yeah, actually that was one thing that we didn't change, but we'll change this one to be author, because now we were actually saving the things. But this is now an author. It has the placeholder author. The placeholder title is new write title, so we add a new field, and because it's just a template, which should just be added here, but obviously won't, or our logic doesn't automatically do any additions. So what we can do is hit bike rides and then do copy paste maneuver, and then author is just what this app's author is, or new ride author is, and then title, and then let's set that to title, and then we have just two fields, and they're both add field to the current create struct. So now I would expect this to work. So you have author is Rovin ride, and then once I click create new ride, now it created an object, so it passed through, and so we're happy. It doesn't have an image, but our functionality works so that it doesn't matter that it's not an image. Again, maybe, yeah, I don't know actually if I think about it. Author is, if I leave author, or author is Jani, and if I leave this one, it will try to send an empty value, and I think that might actually be enough for it to return an error, because yeah, it's an empty value, so it's not set. So this is how you get the server-side validation in the end, but for usability in many cases, the more you can handle on the client side, the more you should handle on the client side. But in any case, to move forward, is I have a big error if there is an error. So content creation failed. Did I actually, let's see if I got that in the console. Do search. Yeah, maybe that somehow doesn't work, but it's not matter. But let's just try to run to the end. So here, we create something, then what we get in response, or we get a response, then we saved it with the content create, but it's obviously, if you know easy concepts, it's saved but it's not published yet, so we need to specifically also publish it. You might want to do all kind of things, that if these rides were to be approved by somebody, so you wouldn't just publish it, you could maybe publish it and or set the do whatever you're used to using the Easy API for. Then here, because we actually want to just publish it right away, again, similar method. I had to look up that I actually need to pass the API information, and then I just assume that it's the first version because I now publish it. And then there's another call, and then if this goes through, then created and published content object something, and that is again set to the message. So we should actually have here, yeah, I actually forgot that I didn't console log it, I used this area to have those here, and then let me try to create another. Arctic ride. Okay, what did I miss? Did it? Yeah. Anyway, it's here, but probably there's some small issue with the code. But you can still see that we created two items using the API through mostly sort of quite high level API. And then if we simply head back to the admin, we should have a total of 5 items now. here, and they're no different from any other item, so it's all the same exact repository, so you can work with them whatever. So it doesn't all need to be, but if you, for example, want to have I don't know, some web technology based mobile application, this is what you could use to get people to upload images. Instead of sending raw post requests or whatever by hand, this is what you could use. And that's now there. Then we had one last step. We have around 10 minutes, so we'll take a quick look at this. Then the hybrid. So by hybrid, I mean that currently our main application is this, but if you were yesterday, for example, in the session with this, David, you saw how you could get this and match the templates. So this is a good example maybe for a hybrid that not everything needs to come out from one location, so I'm not going to go through all the steps. Cache, because I was running production mode. So now we should have the layout, it's embedded, so we have parts of the content coming in the like regular way. So go bike, welcome to Easy Platform, and then we have the front page information, but then we also have part coming through the other machine. And this is obviously just using what you normally use. So what was done to do this was we added the resources, views, or actually config, views. So I matched the front page template, and then I created the home page template with a simple page layout where you can see that the Easy Platform front page, maybe we can try editing it. So short name, like that, publish. So this is the just root of the site being a regular content field or admin, and then just again copy pasting that we have Robin test here, and this is mostly to show that you don't have to select one or the other. It's quite simple to use both together. If you use view, there's obviously one thing that's noticeable is that the template syntax is the same. So the double curly braces will be picked up by Twig if you don't specifically exit here, or I mean here set it as raw that it doesn't support, but you don't need to have all the templates in line for view. You can also download the templates from separate files. And again, this was just one example, but the client API is something that's completely separate from anything. If you want to use, I don't know, just use jQuery or whatever you used using, but maybe you would have sent requests by hand, sort of just $get something. You might want to instead use this one. But there's no right or wrong way, or maybe there's wrong way, but there's multiple right ways. Let's say that maybe that's safer to say there's plenty of, or there's wrong ways, but there's definitely plenty of right ways as well. And that is part which we now achieve the main goal. So we have still 20 minutes until the next session. So I would maybe just like to have a quick conclusion about this part, and then have a quick look at, because I messed things up for you, so I want to show you what I actually worked with, which is an alternative. But the conclusion here is that, well, obviously going headless is not maybe the silver bullet, because you would still need to do navigation, and a lot of the complexities here we didn't even go through, because you would need to dynamically get all the routes for a page, which kind of all pages you might have, and a lot of things which are actually much better to do and nicer to do with Twig kind of thing, and also partly better performance, because you can serve it right now, and also more efficient because you don't need to learn the basic things, and the client API abstracts the default backend, the REST API. It actually does it quite well, but it is very generic, and you can see that especially if you would need to fetch individual fields, it could lead up to many requests going back and forth, which might be or is harmful, even though HTTP2 is improves things, but there's still always overhead when you make a single request. So in many cases you might want to use something specifically built for your application. But for content creation, for example, I think it's very good. You don't need to worry about or remember a lot of things. And the hybrid approach, in my opinion, is still very much the most practical in many cases. So if we jump quickly back here, we might have this list and this one in some section, for example, but main navigation I would probably just create regularly. And of course you can augment it and add items dynamically on it all, essentially how you want to build it. But then finally, just to take things completely separate, because I wanted this bonus section, which is GraphQL. It's similar to REST, does the same kind of things, but it's more generic. It's more specified in what exactly it is, because you have Easy Publish has its REST API, or Easy Platform has its REST API. Whatever services have, everybody has a REST API, but the REST API doesn't actually, it only defines how things should work on a high level. It doesn't specify specific things. So then it's you need to do maybe quite a bit of work in many cases. But GraphQL is more generic. It's some originally Facebook stuff, but it has really interesting things, which might be coming useful. But one thing is, this is not something that Easy Platform or Studio currently have, or I wouldn't go and call support what's up with the GraphQL backend, because you need to build it yourself currently. But the nice thing about it, because Easy is built on Symfony, and Symfony already has a big community, so you can leverage bits and pieces. So if we want to create this whatever GraphQL backend or whatever in the future might be some efficient binary format that you would send, Easy doesn't need to create the whole thing, because you can take bits and pieces and then work together with the public API to create those. But GraphQL is obviously just one example, but it's most, what I like about it is that it's very generic, and it's very self-descriptive, because here this is this client API is called GraphQL, but this is an API which I built sort of a mock-up GraphQL backend. It doesn't serve anything real, but it self-documents, which is nice. So you've never seen this before, but I know that if I put curly braces, if only, maybe I'll switch over here for this section. Yeah. Just because I know the keyboard better, so I know that this is like this, and then I can write bike rides, and then because it's built in the API, that it sends information on what fields we have. So this is not an easy thing. It's another completely separate standard. But I can then write bike rides. Okay, that's nice. Then if I select run, I get bike rides, and then I define that I want the ID. But I knew, for example, that I have a title. So then, because the title is something I can select, and this is now I can. This is a very generic GraphQL client, but it could be something completely different. So I can select, and obviously I would need to patch this up to the actual backend, but because there's already a lot of work, because there's actually quite a few things going back and forth. If I this wasn't actually there. If I open again the network tab, and then I will click the bike ride, because maybe it's so simple when you look at it from outside, because you don't see a lot of the action. You just, I put something here, but if I put title here, okay, why doesn't it actually sell? What is actually sent over the wire is a sort of GraphQL queries, which you can find out more about. But the key here is that it took me maybe 2 hours to patch up this thing, and the code, which I don't expect you to have any kind of detailed look into, but essentially you build your own schemas. Whatever powers those schemas is actually none of anybody's business. It's in this case it's a standard Symfony or Symfony framework bundle, which I define that bike rides here. I could dynamically build this, but if I were to say that bike rides, if I just, as a user, I would say that we've now added something to our bike rides. This is now manually defined here, but let's say we would add temperature, well, maybe height or elevation. So I would add elevation to our API, and then this is just the fields that I have, but then the key here is resolving individual fields, which is something where you would use, instead of having something that you write manually, like I write here, elevation. Elevation is random 1 to 2000. This is just any PHP call, so what you could do is just resolve using easy public API. But what this whole thing does around is that it offers this kind of framework for you to develop APIs that are easy to consume. Because we added elevation now, then I can be some kind of random man and come to your site or your API. Then I know that there's bike rides, sure. Then I can say elevation, and then the elevation is just a layer, so it doesn't replace easy, or it just augments it. But the nice part is that you also get this kind of you can define and document your API in this way, and then the key is that this might be powered, who knows, by WordPress or whatever. This abstracts it higher, and it's not very commonplace currently, but I think it's commonplace in the sense that if you use Facebook on mobile, then you're using this format. But it's just something that you might want to consider if you decide to build something new, because it's also nice that you define exactly what you want. So instead of you getting all the individual fields, you only get the fields that you want. So I want data from bike rides, and I want only elevation and only title. It won't automatically give me everything. It will give me what I wanted and what I asked for. And this is something that's maybe next year, summer camp, it will be that everybody uses it. But it's still something that's worth considering if you're building, it's called GraphQL. And it's, again, it's a transport level technology technically, so it's not defined to work only with easy or only with anything, but it's more generic than what REST API means. And this is something that you could use today, but you need to do some work of yourself, but you don't have to build the GraphQL server yourself. You can use the GraphQL server and then hook behind the scenes easy to that server. And then it's really, at least on demo cases, it works really nice. I don't know if it is that in real life, when you make some complex things, then it becomes a nightmare. So it's not going to kill any kind of like REST API, but it's a nice alternative. And that should be it. We have 8 minutes until the, what was it, web battle thing. If anybody has any questions. Yeah, good.
I was wondering if you had a site where you only wanted people that were authenticated to using things. If you had a site where you wanted people to have access to make changes to content, but only if they're authenticated.
Yeah.
Are you pretty much on your own on the front and back end to like implement OAuth, or is there anything that's a part of this that integrates with that?
Well, I don't think there's anything. You would need to have some kind of session. So however you want to create the session, but if you have a valid like Symfony, you create some kind of a OAuth using some Symfony thing, and then you need to then do the connection and then match with the session instead of logging in. So there's plenty of things, and then obviously then your front-end application can do things like if admin, then show delete button. But it might seem like stupid, but if your backend knows who you are, then that's technically valid. It just feels kind of weird, exactly as you said, that you send that kind of information or that kind of string to the user that, are you admin? Yes, then you can see delete button, because in the back end it's always hidden, but it's technically the same kind of thing. But the idea is that the server is still the gatekeeper to the content repository, so it's not very easy to, unless you do this kind of like login as admin and have plain text password, but it's not very, it wouldn't be, yeah.
Is it possible to get the rules and rights of the users logged in via REST API? I don't know.
Well, yeah. So it was asked that, is it possible to get the rules and or the permissions, roles and permissions from Easy? Simple answer is I don't know. But probably, since there is quite good, you can probably get like user info object, and then that probably has, it might take quite a few requests to resolve all that, but I'm sure it can be done. At least you can extend the REST API to provide you that data. And then obviously you could make it more elegant,
Exactly.
you know.
It looks less.
Yeah, it looks less stupid, but it's still always good to remember that people, or for many maybe server-side developers, it's nice that they finally need to expose their code to everybody, so everybody can laugh at it. Whereas, front-end developers always just view the source. Except nowadays you can't view the source in front-end applications because it's been mangled to be something that nobody understands. But anyway, here was a few things. If you have any questions after the session or so on, anytime is good to ask. So I'm here for questions. And who is on Twitter? Yeah, good. So I will post the slides, and I will tell minimum that Ivo or somebody from the official web SC channel will retweet that, so you can find out the details and the URLs and so on. But that's 4 minutes left before the web battle, so now we'll call it a day. Thank you very much for your time, and have a nice evening.